Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a chapter of history that's a little darker, a little colder, and let's be honest, more than a little cruel. Imagine yourself walking through a stone corridor lined with flickering torches. The chill of the stone under your bare feet whispers reminders of just how harsh the world can be, and the distant clatter of armored boots echoes like a promise. This isn't just any walk, though. Tonight, you're stepping into the world of King John of England, a man whose reputation for cruelty, treachery, and cold calculations might just send a shiver down your spine. You probably won't survive this one without a shudder or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, and the first image that comes to mind is King John sitting in his stone-walled chamber, illuminated by the flicker of tallow candle. He's scowling at parchment, scrawling commands with a quill that drags across rough parchment like claws scratching a door. His court is tense. Cortes whispering about his unpredictable mood and relentless greed. They say he was a cruelest of the Plantagenets, the one who could raise taxes without mercy and imprison rivals on a whim. The walls of the chamber are adorned with faded tapestries depicting hunts and battles, but the real game was always one of power. John's favorite pastime? Squeezing his nobles and subjects dry, with fines and levies so high even the richest barons felt their purses shrink. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about in an earlier story? Well, imagine John levying a fine for something just as absurd. Say, a tax on the color of your horse's manere. Historians still argue whether his reputation was truly earned or exaggerated by chroniclers with an axe to grind, but his reign was undoubtedly harsh. Picture John, pacing behind his heavy oak desk, pondering how to break the resistance of rebellious barons. The Magna Carta? That wasn't a gift from a benevolent king. It was wrested from him under threat of civil war, signed with gritted teeth and broken promises. Some say he later reneged on nearly every clause, while others argue he was simply overwhelmed by the pressures of ruling an unruly kingdom. Either way, the tale is clear. When John made a promise, it was usually worth less than the wax seal he used to stamp it. As you sit there, listening to the faint rustle of your own breath and the imagined shuffle of parchment, consider this. John's cruelty wasn't limited to politics. His enemies often found themselves in cold, damp dungeons. Some even starved to death. And that wasn't just a quirk of medieval justice. It was personal. Chroniclers tell of one unfortunate nobleman, William de Braose, who, along with his family, was imprisoned and left to starve. The story goes that Browse's wife was found dead with bite marks on her arms, a hint that she may have tried to eat her own flesh to survive. It's a tale that still haunts the corridors of historical debate. The candles flicker, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, and you can almost hear the clink of keys and the heavy clang of iron doors. You imagine John smirking as he orders another rival lockaway, his words as cold as the stone floor. Let them learn the meaning of loyalty, he might have said, his voice low and unyielding. Your breath catches as you picture the heavy chains, the gaolers clanking keys at their belts, and the muffled cries from the depths of the dungeon. John's England wasn't a place of gentle justice. It was a land where mercy was rare and cruelty was a calculated tool of control. Even the church wasn't safe from his grasp. He was excommunicated by Pope Innocent III for his refusal to accept Stephen Langton as Archbishop of Canterbury. But did that stop him? Not a chance. He simply seized church lands and revenues, filling his coffers while priests and monks grumbled in the shadows. And as you drift further into this story, lulled by the slow rhythm of history's footsteps, you might wonder how a king so low could maintain his throne. The answer lies not just in power, but in fear. John knew how to play factions against each other, how to keep enemies guessing, and how to turn allies into pawn. He was a master of balancing on the edge of rebellion without falling, until he finally did. The air grows colder as you imagine the last days of John's reign. He died in 1216, some say from dysentery, others whisper poison. His death was as inglorious as his life. His body laid to rest in Worcester Cathedral, overshadowed by the memory of his failure. But his story, woven with threads of greed, betrayal, and a ruthless grip on power, lives on. You settle deeper into the softness around you, the darkness wrapping closer as the tale of King John echoes in your mind. You can almost hear the scratch of his quill, the shuffle of cloaks in the hall, and the faint, ghostly echoes of those who suffered under his rule. Your journey continues, the dimly lit corridors of history drawing you deeper. You imagine the torchlight flickering along the crumbling stone walls of a grim castle perched above a windswept cliff. Tonight, you're wandering into the shadowy realm of Lad III of Wallachia, the man whose nickname, the Impaler, was not a term of endearment, but rather a bone-chilling description of his favorite pastime. You feel the weight of dread as you picture the landscape littered with wooden stakes, each one a monument to his merciless reign. As you step into this tale, you might hear the faint creak of a wooden cart being dragged up the rocky path to his stronghold, carrying the condemned, their fates sealed by a ruler whose cruelty made even the most hardened warriors pause. You probably wouldn't survive a single encounter with Lad, not even a brief one. Your breath slows as you imagine him, a figure standing tall in a long crimson cloak, his dark eyes glittering with a mixture of calculation and cruelty. His castle's great hall is filled with a heavy scent of burning pitch, the iron tang of blood lingering like a silent warning. Vlad wasn't just cruel for sport. His methods were deliberate, calculated, and meant to send messages loud and clear. His impalements were not done hastily. The stakes were sharpened to a fine point, bodies hoisted high to prolong the agony. Historians still argue whether his reign was fueled purely by bloodlust or whether he saw terror as a strategic tool to control his realm, keep enemies at bay, and deter betrayal. You shift uncomfortably, picturing the eerie scene of a forest of impaled bodies outside his castle. Enemies, criminals, dissenters, all left to sway in the wind. And while the tale sounds like something from the depths of a dark fairy tale, Vlad's reputation was all too real. His ruthlessness knew few bounds. Even envoy from the mighty Ottoman Empire weren't immune. One story tells of how he impaled visiting diplomats who refused to remove their hats in his presence, leaving them skewered for their perceived insult. Imagine standing there, part of an entourage, and realizing that the cost of keeping your hat on was your life. The flickering torchlight cast strange shadows along the walls, and you picture the castle's inner chambers filled with whispered tales and fearful glances. The air itself feels heavy, as if saturated with the echo of screams. Yet Vlad's legacy wasn't entirely villainous in the eyes of some. There are whispers that he maintained order in a time of chaos, that his severe measures kept crime in check and enemies at bay. Some accounts even paint him as a national hero, a defender of Wallachia against Ottoman incursion. Historians still debate whether he was a tyrant or a patriot, or perhaps both. You feel the chill seep deeper into your bones as you imagine the heavy oak doors slamming shut behind you, trapping you inside a castle where loyalty is tested with steel and where betrayal is met with stakes. Vlad's table, you imagine, might have been laden with roast meats and goblets of wine, but no amount of feasting could mask the palpable tension, the knowledge that a wrong word or glance could mark you for the next stake. As your thoughts drift, you might even picture the villagers living under his rule. How did they survive, knowing their lord's reputation? How many whispered prayers were offered as they gathered their harvest, hoping to avoid notice? The fields of Wallachia, you realize, were not just fertile with crops, but also with fear. And yet, life continued. Markets bustled, families huddled around fires, and merchants plied their trade, all under the watchful eyes of Vlad's agent. You can almost hear the distant howl of wolves on the wind, the low murmur of fearful prayers as night falls over the castle. Your imagination paints the scene of Vlad, seated in his high-backed chair, the flicker of candlelight dancing across his impassive features as he listens to reports from his spies. His reputation was built not just on the stakes that lined his roads, but on the fear that slithered through every corridor, seeped into every shadow. And then, just as you feel yourself slipping deeper into this dark tapestry of power and cruelty, you remember that Vlad's story didn't end with impalement and terror. He was eventually betrayed, imprisoned, and finally fell from power. His end was less dramatic than his reign, a quiet, almost anticlimactic fade into history. Yet his legend endures, immortalized in stories, songs, and whispers that echo through the centuries. Your breath softens, the shadows thickening as the imagined night deepen. You feel the weight of Vlad's legacy, his cruel but calculated reign, and the quiet horror of a world where power meant wielding fear like a sword. You settle into the darkness, the faint rustle of imaginary silk and the distant clatter of unseen chains soothing your thoughts as the tale continued. Your journey through the corridors of cruelty leads you now into the darkened halls of history where Eleanor of Aquitaine casts a long, subtle shadow. Ah, you're already feeling a bit of surprise, aren't you? You thought Eleanor was a cultured queen, a patron of the arts, a matriarch of Europe. And she was. But she was also a woman who played a political game with an iron hand beneath her velvet gloves, a strategist who wielded influence and control that made even the most hardened men tread carefully. You probably wouldn't survive her court if you dared to challenge her. Imagine the cool air of a grand hall, tapestries rich with color and shimmering with delicate threads of gold, yet each telling a story of control and power. You picture Eleanor seated in a high-backed chair, a wimple framing her sharp gaze, her hand lightly resting on the armrest, her expression serene but her mind calculating every word, every gesture, every shift in the balance of power. She wasn't overtly cruel with blade or stakes, but her strength was in manipulation, in outmaneuvering rival, and in ensuring her survival and that of her line. You trace the faint scent of rosewater and beeswax through the corridors, mingling with the whispered fears of courtiers. They say, in hushed tones, that Eleanor's true cruelty was her ability to bend people to her will and discard them when they were no longer useful. Her marriages, to Louis VII of France and then to Henry II of England, were not merely unions of love or convenience. They were power plays. Some accounts suggest she charmed and entrapped her way into both thrones, and when her alliances faltered, she did not hesitate to move on. Historians still argue whether her imprisonment for nearly 2 decades by her own husband Henry II, no less, was a result of a cruelty turned inward or a calculated survival tactic in a world where queens were pawns and players alike. You can almost hear the echo of her footsteps in the cold stone corridors of a prison at Salisbury Castle, her thoughts swirling like the silent draft that whispered through the windows. Your mind drifts to her children, particularly Richard the Lionheart and King John. How many of their own dark, calculating tendencies were born from watching their mother maneuver and manipulate, whisper, and direct from behind the scenes. They say Eleanor's legacy wasn't just a cultural patronage or her impressive line of descendants. It was also the cold, strategic mind she passed down like a family heirloom. And yet, Eleanor wasn't all cold calculation. The stories of her patronage of the arts, her support of the courts of love, and her role as a symbol of refinement coexist with the shadowy tales of intrigue. You imagine her presiding over a courtly gathering, her voice soft and persuasive as she encourages poets to weave delicate stories of love and honor, all while ensuring her political interests are served in the subtext. The scent of crushed herbs and candle smoke fills the air, the soft scrape of a lute providing a gentle soundtrack to subtle but ruthless conversation. You walk alongside her in your imagination, feeling the weight of her presence, serene, cultured, yet razor-sharp beneath the surface. How many rivals were quietly undermined? How many alliances formed with a smile but sealed with silent threats? Historians still argue whether Eleanor's power was born from necessity or personal ambition, whether her machinations were for her survival or for the sheer thrill of control. The scene shifts as you picture the grand procession through Aquitaine, Eleanor's lands lush and vibrant, but beneath the celebration lies the whisper of dissatisfaction. She knew how to use spectacle to distract from dissent, how to cloak control in splendor. The very road she traveled, lined with flowers and banners, were also lined with the hidden calculations of a queen who refused to be outplayed. You feel the gentle weight of the satchel at your side, as if you're carrying secret from her court. The scent of ink, the rustle of parchment sealed with the wax of a clandestine message. Even as you imagine drifting into sleep, her legacy lingers, a quiet but persistent reminder that power doesn't always need a blade. Sometimes it's a measured smile, the carefully chosen word, the unwavering gaze. You close your eyes, the soft rustle of silk and the faint echo of a footstep soothing you into a dreamlike haze. Eleanor's world isn't one of screaming terror or clashing swords. It's a quiet, deliberate cruelty of a mind always 10 steps ahead. A chess master playing a game where the stakes were kingdoms and the pawns were people. You settle into this intricate tapestry, the threads of power and whispers of calculated intent wrapping around you like a heavy velvet cloak. You step softly into the next shadowed corridor of cruelty, the air heavier here, with a scent of incense and the faintest trace of iron, a hint, perhaps, of blood spilled for faith. The figure waiting for you is a complex one, a man whose name alone conjures images of piety turned to fanaticism. His name, Tomás de Torquemada. Yes, the Grand Inquisitor himself, the master architect behind the Spanish Inquisition's darkest design. You imagine the dim glow of candlelight flickering across stone walls, chill settling into the marrow of your bone. Torquemada sits in a simple chair, his black robes plain but heavy, his fingers lightly drumming against a worn wooden table. The table itself is bare, save for a heavy tome of canon law and a simple iron crucifix. There's a calm to him that's almost eerie, as though he's convinced of the righteousness of every decision, every life ruined in pursuit of pure faith. You can almost hear him murmuring prayers in a voice soft and low, the cadence soothing, almost hypnotic, yet each word edged with steel. They say, you murmur, feeling a shiver run down your spine, that Torquemada's true cruelty lay not in the tortures or burnings, but in his unwavering belief that he was saving souls by any means necessary. Historians still argue whether his fervor was genuine or masked for dark ambition, but as you imagine walking through the quiet halls of his inquisitorial chambers, the air feels charged with suppressed cries and whispered confession. You picture the long procession of those accused of heresy, shuffling along cold corridors, their chains clinking softly, their faces pale with fear. You think of the parchments Torquemada signed with a firm, unflinching hand, each decree a quiet death sentence cloaked in the language of salvation. The faint scent of ink and wax seems to curl from those imagined pages, mingling with the heady aroma of incense burning in brass censers swung by silent monks. In this imagining, the faces of the accused are anonymous, blurred by time, but their terror is palpable. You hear the faintest rustle of robes, the low murmur of Latin prayers, the scrape of a chair against stone as Torquemada leans forward, his gaze unblinking, his lips parting to ask a single question that would decide a life's trajectory. The silence that follows is louder than any shout, the verdict already sealed by fate's heavy hand. You might wonder, as you walk quietly through these imagined halls, how Torquemada reconciled his conscience with his action. Did he see himself as a hero of the faith, a guardian of truth, or as a man driven by fear of chaos and dissent? Some say his own insecurities shaped his path, that the rigidity of his judgments was a shield against his own doubt. Historians still argue whether the cruelty of the Inquisition was a result of his personal flaws or the inevitable outcome of a system that equated uniformity with safety. The world outside these imagined chambers moves on, the sun rising and setting, the markets bustling with life, unaware or indifferent to the quiet terror within. You picture the contrast, a busy plaza filled with merchants and children playing, while just beyond the walls, a soul was broken by whispered accusations and the relentless machinery of interrogation. You feel the weight of that contrast settle over you like a cloak, a reminder that cruelty can wear many faces, and sometimes it wears a face of conviction. Your mind drifts to the symbols of Torquemada's world, the stark cross, the heavy book, the iron key that locks a door behind a trembling soul. These objects seem to glow faintly in the dim candlelight, their edges sharp against the surrounding gloom. You feel the pull of sleep in this imagined space, your breath slowing, the sounds of the world outside fading into the soft hum of Latin prayers and the subtle, inexorable rhythm of footsteps on stone. You close your eyes and drift, carried on the quiet, chilling current of history's whisper, the soft chant of monks, the faint scrape of quills on parchment, the echo of a cell door closing. These sounds merge into a lullaby of shadows. In this space between waking and sleep, Torquemada's legacy lingers, a reminder that cruelty can be cloaked in piety, that the hand raised in blessing can also deliver judgment. You feel the soft weight of the imagined satchel at your side, filled with fragments of these stories, and you drift further, deeper, into the quiet, unsettling embrace of sleep. Your steps echo faintly in the dim corridors of history as you move onward into the next story. Tonight, the air grows warmer, tinged with the earthy scent of damp soil and something sharper, almost acrid. You're no longer inside stone walls, but standing amidst a field of mud and blood, the rhythmic clash of swords and the thunder of hooves rising and falling like a terrible drumbeat. And at the center of it all stands Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia. You squint against the imagined sunlight that glints off armor and sharpened stakes. Vlad's figure looms in your mind's eye, a tall, wiry man with a hawk-like nose and piercing eyes, dressed in the layered finery of a Balkan prince. His cloak flutters slightly in the breeze, and in one hand he holds a scepter that doubles as a spear. At his feet, the ground is littered with discarded helmets, broken shields, and a chilling sight of bodies impaled on long wooden poles, their expressions frozen in moments of agony and disbelief. They say, you whisper, that Vlad's cruelty wasn't just a punishment, it was strategy. He believed terror could be a weapon sharper than any blade. Historians still argue whether his infamous acts were calculated defenses against invading forces or the product of a warped mind. Either way, the result was the same. Villages emptied, forests of stakes lining the roads, and the terrified murmurs of survivors spreading his legend farther than any army ever could. You can almost hear the wind rustling through the tall grasses that surround the battlefield, the faint buzz of flies drawn to the gruesome scene. Vlad's soldiers stand nearby, some pale and silent, others hardened to the horror by sheer necessity. They exchange glances, their hands tightening on sword hilts as they await his next command. In the distance, smoke curls from the thatched roofs of a burned village, the scent of scorched wood mixing with the iron tang of blood. You shift your imagined focus, picturing the village square where Vlad once staged public execution, his enemies displayed on stakes as a warning. The villagers, faces drawn with fear, cluster at the edges, whispering prayers and casting wary glances toward the prince's banner. His standard flutters against the sky, a dark silhouette against the bright midday sun. Children clutch their mother's skates, too young to understand the spectacle, but sensing its danger. In the quiet between scenes, you catch a snippet of folklore, a tale whispered around firesides about how Vlad dined among his impaled victims, calmly sipping wine as though at a banquet. Historians still debate the veracity of this macabre image, but the story lingers, a testament to the strange intersection of myth and reality. The idea of a ruler so hardened, so chillingly composed, adds a layer of fascination to his already fearsome legacy. The donkey, who has patiently accompanied you on this journey, shifts uneasily in your imagined scene, his ears flicking at the unseen horrors. You reach out, offering a silent stroke to his neck, grounding yourself in the moment, even as your thoughts are pulled into the swirling mist of cruelty's past. You can almost hear Vlad's voice, low, commanding, threaded with an accent as sharp as his blades, as he orders another line of prisoners to be led to the stakes. Your gaze drifts upward to the sky, where clouds scuttle like frightened sheep, the light shifting in and out of shadow. The smell of smoke and charred flesh hangs heavy, and yet, beyond it all, there's a strange quiet, a stillness that falls when even terror becomes routine. You feel a twinge of unease, a realization that cruelty can harden the hearts of those who witness it, turning fear into numbness and numbness into complicity. The wind picks up, carrying with it the faint, dissonant strains of a folk tune, something mournful, sung by a voice almost too soft to hear. You imagine it as a lullaby, a song of survival, hummed by a mother cradling her child while keeping one wary eye on the road where Vlad's patrols might pass. The tune blends with the rustle of tall grass and the clatter of wooden wheels in the distance, a soundscape that soothes and unsettles all at once. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the imagined satchel at your side, filled now with stories both grotesque and mesmerizing. The satchel feels heavier, yet strangely comforting, a reminder that even the darkest tales can offer glimpses into the complexities of the human spirit. You let the imagined world soften around you, the edges blurring into the hush of sleep, as the images of Vlad's legacy fade into the quiet, shadowed corners of history's vast tapestry. Your breath fogs faintly as you step deeper into the tapestry of shadows and tales, the hush of the imagined world settling around you like a heavy cloak. This time, your path leads you through narrow alleys of cobblestone, where tall stone walls seem to lean inward, pressing close like silent witnesses to secrets better left unspoken. And waiting at the end of this alley, wrapped in both dread and fascination, is the name of a woman who has haunted the edges of history's darker pages, Elizabeth Bathory. You can almost hear the echo of her delicate slippers on polished floors, the swish of heavy velvet skirts as she glides through her castle's grand hallways. The air smells faintly of rose water and candle wax, but there's a sharper undercurrent, something metallic, almost like blood. Elizabeth's face appears in your mind's eye, a noble woman's delicate features framed by an intricate coif, her eyes dark and unreadable, her lips tinted with a hint of wine or perhaps something darker. She is the infamous Blood Countess, wrapped in legends as dense and impenetrable as the castle walls that once imprisoned her. They say, you murmur, your voice barely a whisper against the imagined silence, that Elizabeth Bathory bathed in the blood of young girls to preserve her beauty. Historians still argue whether these chilling tales were exaggerated by political enemies or rooted in fragments of truth. Either way, the image endures, a woman seated in a tub of crimson, her alabaster skin gleaming beneath flickering candlelight. You wander through the imagined halls of Achta's castle, where whispers of Elizabeth's cruelty cling like cobwebs. You can almost hear the muffled sobs of servants, the rustle of skirts as they hurry through darkened corridors, and the faint clink of iron chain. In one chamber, tapestries hang heavy and thick, their patterns woven with flowers and beasts that seem to watch silently. The air is thick with the scent of wax and old fabric, of secrets pressed between stone and cloth. Your donkey's imagined presence becomes a comforting weight at your side, his breath steady and warm, a reminder that even the darkest tales can be softened by companionship. You pause by an imagined window, gazing out over moonlit fields that stretch away from the castle's looming silhouette. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howls, its cry carried on the wind and swallowed by the night's hush. You step into a chamber where a long oak table stands beneath a chandelier dripping with wax. Platters of food lie abandoned, roasted fowl, wheels of cheese, bowls of fruit slowly withering in the candlelight. The shadows dance across the table, hinting at a feast interrupted, as though the revelers vanish into thin air, leaving only the heavy scent of wine and decay. They say, you murmur, that Elizabeth entertained nobles here, her hospitality concealing dark appetites. Historians still debate whether her supposed crimes were fueled by madness, sadism, or the manipulations of rivals eager to see her fall. A cold draught seems to brush your imagined skin as you approach a stone staircase winding downward. The steps creak underfoot, the darkness thickening with each descent. At the bottom, you find yourself in the castle's dungeon, the walls slick with damp and marked with faint, scratched runes. The air smells of mildew and iron, and you imagine the ghostly traces of prisoners long gone, their voices echoing faintly in the stillness. Somewhere nearby, a trickle of water drips steadily, a metronome for forgotten sorrows. Your mind paints a scene of Elizabeth in her final days, locked away in a narrow tower room, her once opulent gowns replaced by simple, coarse garments. Her hair hangs loose and tangled, her hands pale and trembling as she traces patterns on the stone wall. The whispers of courtiers fade, replaced by the low murmur of prayers and the shuffle of guards outside her door. They say, you reflect, that Elizabeth Bathory spent her last years in prison, her crimes echoing louder than any plea for mercy. Historians still argue whether she truly believed she was preserving youth or simply wielding cruelty like a scepter. The donkey's ears twitch as though catching distant sounds, the clatter of hooves, the rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze. You let the imagined world soften, the edges of Elizabeth's legend blurring into the shadows. The scent of rosewater fades, replaced by the fresh earthiness of the imagined road ahead. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of stories settle around you like a familiar blanket, their darkness balanced by the comforting rhythm of footsteps and the steady pace of your gentle companion. You continue along the imagined path, the castle walls receding into the night's embrace, the echo of Bathory's name fading into the hush of history. The road stretches ahead, promising more tales, some darker, some lighter, all waiting to be whispered beneath the stars as the world drifts softly towards sleep. The road stretches before you, winding through rolling hills where the grass sways in gentle waves beneath the moonlight. The donkey's steps are measured and steady, his ears flicking at the distant sounds of night birds and the soft rustle of leaves. The air holds a hint of something distant and smoky, as though a village hearth crackles somewhere over the next hill. Your satchel shifts at your side, its weight a gentle tug, reminding you that the path you follow is paved with whispers, legends, and forgotten names. Tonight's tale leads you to the shadow of a man whose name still stays unknown, Vlad III of Wallachia, known to many as Vlad the Impaler. You feel the faintest tremor of curiosity, your steps slowing as if the very earth remembers his heavy tread. His fortress rises in your mind. Imagine spires and battlements etched against a stormy sky, their outlines sharp and unyielding. You hear the faint clink of armor, the low murmur of voices thick with fear and reverence. They say, you whisper, that Vlad's cruelty was unmatched, that his enemies feared him more than death itself. Historians still argue whether his infamous impalements were acts of calculated terror or exaggerated by later tales. But here, in the hush of your imagined journey, the details sharpen, lines of wooden stakes stretching like a macabre forest, each one bearing silent testimony to his grim reputation. You pause at an imagined camp, where soldiers sit hunched around a fire, their faces drawn and wary. The smell of roasting meat drifts toward you, mingling with a sharper scent of leather and sweat. One soldier, his voice low and thick with an accent that curls around each word, recounts a tale of Vlad's battlefield tactics, how he would leave fields of impaled foes in plain sight to demoralize advancing armies. They say he once dined among the dead. The soldier murmurs, his voice falling to a hush. Historians still debate whether it was an act of madness or a message to rivals, but none who saw it forgot. The donkey shifts at your side, his ears flicking uneasily as though he, too, senses the weight of such tales. You press on, imagining the castle at Targovite, its walls thick and windowless, its gates heavy with iron. The corridors echo with booted steps, the scent of tallow and wine clinging to the stone. You picture Vlad seated at a long table, his garments rich with embroidery, his fingers tapping absently on the wood as he listens to the murmurs of courtiers and emissaries. His eyes, dark and sharp, miss nothing. They say, You reflect that Vlad's cruelty was as precise as his strategy, that every act, no matter how monstrous, served a purpose. Historians still argue whether his reign was driven by a hunger for power, a desire for order, or a deeper, darker instinct. The imagined road winds into a quiet village on the edge of forest. The air is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The houses low and huddled together like sheep against the night. You hear the faint notes of a lullaby drifting from an open window, a soft counterpoint to the grim legend trailing in your footsteps. The villagers, it said, locked their doors and whispered prayers when Vlad's name was spoken. Even now, his shadow lingers in the cracked plaster and weathered wood, in the wary glances passed between neighbors. You cross a narrow wooden bridge spanning a stream that gurgles softly beneath moonlit reeds. The water chill kisses your skin as you pause to dip your fingers, the ripples spreading outward like echoes of forgotten fays. Your donkey lowers his head to drink, his breath stirring tiny eddies in the stream's surface. You feel the weight of Vlad's story settle like a stone in your thoughts, heavy but curiously compelling, its edges softened by the hush of the night and the steady cadence of your imagined footsteps. As the path leads you upward, the trees thicken, their branches arching overhead in a canopy of silvered leaves. The air cools, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and the sharp tang of iron. You imagine a solitary figure standing at the edge of a clearing, his silhouette stark against the rising moon. His face is pale and impassive, his garments dark and regal, a thin smile playing at his lips as he surveys a landscape of silence and shadow. They say, you murmur, that Vlad's story is more than just cruelty. There's a reminder of a thin line between fear and power. Historians still debate whether his legacy is one of tyrant or protector, monster or hero. The donkey's steady pace carries you past the imagined edge of Vlad's shadow, the night stretching open before you once more. The stars wheel slowly overhead, their light glinting on the path like scattered coin. The scent of pine and the soft rustle of leaves mingle with the distant murmur of a river unseen, its waters weaving quiet lullabies through the landscape. You move forward, your steps lighter now, as though the weight of Vlad's tale has dissolved into the night air. The donkey's breath is steady and sure, a gentle rhythm against the silence. The road curves ahead, promising more stories waiting to be whispered beneath the stars, tales of power and fear, of secrets carried on the wind, of a history both darker and more human than the legend suggests. You leave behind the imagined echoes of Vlad's legend as the path meanders down toward a broad, slow-moving river. The moon's reflection glimmers like a trail of coins scattered across the water's surface. The donkey's steps are muffled by the soft earth beneath his hooves, the gentle sound harmonizing with the chorus of night insects. The air is cooler here, carrying the scent of damp reeds and the faint tang of fish. You pause for a moment, watching as a heron lifts its wings and drifts silently into the sky. Tonight's journey leads you to another shadowed figure from medieval history, Gilles de Rais. His name whispers through the air like a ghost at your shoulder, unsettling yet fascinating. You step closer to the riverbank, your reflection wavering alongside the donkeys as though caught between worlds. The path seems narrower now, the darkness pressing close, yet your curiosity draws you onward. They say, you murmur, that Gilles was once a hero, a companion of Joan of Arc before his fall from grace. Historians still argue whether his descent into cruelty was born of madness, despair, or dark appetites. But one thing is certain, his name became synonymous with dread. You imagine his castle, the heavy stone walls rising from the Loire's edge, its towers silhouetted against a storm-swept sky. Inside, opulence mingled with shadow, silk tapestries muffling whispers, and candlelight flickering against gleaming armor. The donkey snorts softly, his breath visible in the cooling air. You walk on, picturing Gilles in his youth, an armored knight astride a warhorse, his banner fluttering as he fought alongside Joan. His courage was once praised in the courts of France, his loyalty unquestioned. Yet beneath the accolades, seeds of darkness were sown. They say, you reflect that the fall of a hero is always the hardest to fathom. The imagined road dips beneath an ancient stone archway, the keystone etched with weathered carvings of lions and fleur-de-lis. Your footsteps echo against the stone, the air cool and damp. The scent of damp moss and old wine casks clings to the walls, mingling with something sharper, metal, perhaps, or the faintest trace of fear. You picture the castle's halls, their silence thick and watchful, as though the very walls bear witness to secrets too dark to speak. A stray cat darts across your path, its fur a streak of shadow against the pale moonlight. It pauses, its eyes reflecting green and gold, before vanishing into the undergrowth. The donkey's ears flick, but he continues steadily, unbothered by the sudden movement. You follow, your steps guided by the imagined weight of Jill's story, the whispers of vanished children, the tales of cruelty whispered in courtly circle. Historians still argue whether Gilles' crimes were born of despair or something darker, you muse. But all agree that his fall was as swift as it was terrible. The path widens, opening onto a clearing where moonlight spills like molten silver across the grass. You imagine a lone figure standing at the edge of the clearing, his silhouette regal yet shadowed, his garments shimmer faintly with embroidery, his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze is distant, lost in thoughts you can only guess at. The silence deepens, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. They say Gilles' story is a cautionary tale, you murmur, a reminder how power can curdle into something monstrous. You move forward, the clearing fading behind you as a path curves into a grove of ancient trees. The branches arch overhead, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The donkey's breath is slow and steady, a quiet rhythm against the hush. You picture Gilles in his final days, his castle deserted, his allies fled, the once proud banners tattered and forgotten. The echoes of his name linger in the stones, a quiet testament to the rise and fall of a man who once stood at the pinnacle of French nobility. As you cross a narrow wooden bridge spanning a trickling stream, you pause to dip your fingers into the cool water. The ripples spread outward, the moon's reflection breaking into fragments of silver and shadow. The donkey lowers his head to drink, his ears flicking at the distant murmur of the forest. You feel the weight of Gilles' tale settle like a stone in your thoughts, heavy yet strangely compelling, its edges softened by the night's hush and the slow, steady pace of your imagined journey. The path climbs gently, the trees thinning to reveal a meadow bathed in moonlight. Wildflowers sway in the breeze, their petals catching the pale light. The air is thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the earthy aroma of dew-wet grass. You glance at the satchel at your side, its contents a quiet chorus of stories and secrets, of fears whispered in shadow and power wielded with terrifying precision. The donkey nuzzles your arm, his breath warm and reassuring against the cool night air. You rest your hand lightly on his neck, feeling the steady beat of his pulse beneath your palm. The path curves ahead, promising more tales waiting to be whispered beneath the stars. Stories of darkness and light, of power and peril, of a world where heroes and villains often blur into one. The moon wheels overhead, its light softening the edges of the world, the shadows lengthening like old stories fading into the night. You step forward, your breath steady, your heart quiet, your footsteps blending with the gentle cadence of a journey that continues, one quiet step at a time. The meadow fades behind you as you and the donkey step back onto the winding path, where the trees gather closer, their trunks tall and dark against the moonlit sky. The cool night air wraps around you, scented faintly with moss and the distant aroma of wood smoke. The donkey's hooves strike the packed earth in a steady rhythm, each step a quiet echo of your thought. Your satchel swings lightly against your hip, its weight a reminder of the stories carried within, the shadows mingling with the night. You can almost hear the whispers of another cruel figure from medieval history, Isabella of France. Her name drifts like a chill across the path. Her tale is intricate and twisted as the branches overhead. They say, you murmur softly, that Isabella was called the she-wolf of France, a queen whose ambition and cunning reshaped the course of English history. Historians still argue whether she was a cold-hearted traitor or a woman driven to desperate measures by a husband's neglect and a kingdom in turmoil. You picture her standing in the torchlit halls of a medieval castle, her silk gown trailing over flagstones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Her eyes, dark and calculating, flicker with quiet determination as she plots her next move. The scent of beeswax candles mingles with the sharper tang of iron and the faint perfume of crushed herbs. They say, you reflect, that she played a game few dared to challenge, her ambition matched only by a capacity for cruelty. The donkey pauses at a fork in the path, his ears swiveling as though listening for a signal. You choose a left-hand trail, narrower and darker, where the trees lean closer and the shadows deepen. You imagine Isabella at the head of her army, the banners of rebellion unfurling behind her as she swept into England. Her husband, Edward II, sits isolated in his palace, the weight of his mistakes pressing down upon him. You picture the betrayal, the cold calculations made beneath candlelight, the whispers of allies and the silent nods of conspirators. A fox darts across the path, its russet fur a blur in the moonlight. The donkey flinches, but you soothe him with a gentle word and a light touch to his neck. You continue forward, your step steady as a fox's tracks vanish into the undergrowth. They say, You muse that Isabella's cruelty was born of necessity, a response to a world that left little space for a woman's power. Historians still debate whether her actions were justified, or she was simply a player in a larger, bloodier game. The path curves alongside a stream where the moonlight dances on ripples of water. You pause, the donkey lowering his head to drink, and imagine Isabella's final days, her power slipping away, her influence fading like the moon's reflection. Imprisoned and forgotten, she watches the world she once ruled move on without her. They say a downfall was inevitable, you whisper, a fate waiting for those who dare to grasp too much. The path climbs once more, the trees thinning to reveal the crumbling outline of a ruined stone tower. Ivy coils along its walls, its tendrils reaching like green fingers toward the sky. You can almost hear the echoes of footsteps on spiral stays, the whispered plans, the weight of a crown that brought both power and peril. The donkey snorts softly, his breath mingling with the night air. You rest your hand on his neck, feeling the warmth beneath his coarse coat, a quiet reassurance against the stories of betrayal and ambition. As you move on, the path dips into a hollow where wildflowers bloom in the moonlight, their petals pale and luminous. The air is thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the earthy aroma of damp soil. You pause, plucking a delicate blossom and tucking it behind your aid, a simple gesture of defiance against the darker tale. They say, you murmur, that even in the shadow of cruelty, beauty persists, a reminder that the world is more than just power and pain. You glance at the satchel, its weight pressing against your side like the memory of Isabella's story. Ambition, betrayal, cruelty, and loss. The donkey shifts beside you, his steps slow and steady as you follow the trail into the moonlit distance. The shadows lengthen, the trees parting to reveal the vast expanse of the night sky, its stars scattered like whispers of forgotten tales. You step forward, your breath even, your heart steady, your footsteps blending with the quiet rhythm of a journey that stretches onward, through darkness and light, through stories of cruelty and resilience. The moon casts its glow across the landscape, illuminating the path ahead with a gentle silver sheen. The donkey's ears flick as though catching some distant sound, but the night remains hushed, save for the soft crunch of your footsteps and the quiet murmur of the breeze. You press on, each step carrying you deeper into the tapestry of history's cruelest figures, their stories entwined with your own steady progress through the night. You and the donkey continue your quiet journey along the moonlit path, the air turning crisper with each step. The soft crunch of gravel beneath your boots mixes with a faint rustle of wind through the trees, and the occasional call of a night bird adds a gentle melody to the evening's hush. The satchel at your side grows heavier with each whispered story it holds, a weight of forgotten voices indeed. Tonight, the tale that emerges from the shadows is that of Vlad III, better known to history and legend as Vlad the Impaler. You've probably heard his name before, his reputation immortalized and twisted into the monstrous count of vampire lore. But the reality is even more unsettling in its own way. They say, you murmur, that Vlad was a master of terror, a ruler whose cruelty was designed not just to punish, but to control, to make a statement so loud no one could ignore it. Historians still argue whether his methods were necessary or purely sadistic, but either way, the mark he left on history is as sharp and enduring as the stakes he wielded. The donkey's ears flick nervously as you recall stories of entire fields impaled with the bodies of Vlad's enemies, a grim forest of wooden stakes standing as a gruesome warning to would-be challengers. You imagine the chill that must have crept through the hearts of travelers and envoys as they approached his domain, the sight of those macabre displays speaking louder than any word. They say, you add, that no one dared to cross him twice, for his punishments were as inventive as they were brutal. As you follow the path into a dense grove, the trees close and around you, their twisted branches forming a natural tunnel. You picture Vlad's castle rising from the mist, its jagged silhouette against a gray sky, its walls echoing with the creak of iron gates and the whisper of fearful courtiers. The scent of damp earth mingles with a faint aroma of decaying leaves, and you feel the weight of history pressing close. You glance at the donkey, his calm, steady gaze a counterpoint to the imagined horrors of Vlad's reign. Your footsteps carry you deeper into the woods, where the moonlight filters through the canopy in pale, scattered beam. You recall the tale of how Vlad, captured by his enemies, endured years of imprisonment, only to return more determined than ever, his grip on power tighter and his methods even more ruthless. They say his resilience was as terrifying as his cruelty. You muse. Historians still debate whether his reign was a necessary response to the lawlessness of the time or a descent into madness cloaked in the trappings of justice. A branch snaps somewhere ahead, and the donkey halts, his ears pricked forward. You wait, listening, but but the sound is followed only by silence, the hush of the forest settling back like a blanket. You continue, your steps slower now, your senses sharpened by the imagined threat. You think of the stories whispered around fires in villages, of Lad's spies and his unpredictable wrath, of his cunning strategies that left his enemies outmaneuvered and outnumbered before they even realized they were in a trap. The path emerges from the trees into a clearing where a stream runs softly, its surface silvered by moonlight. You kneel to splash your face, the cold water a brief shock that clears your thought. The donkey drinks quietly, his breath misting in the cool air. The moon's reflection shimmers, distorting into fleeting images of forgotten battles, of castles under siege, of frightened courtiers and weary envoys. They say Vlad's legacy isn't just terror, it's a reminder of how power, unchecked, can twist a man into legend. You reflect softly. You rise, your hand brushing against the satchel's familiar weight, and guide the donkey across the stream. The water laps gently at his hooves, and you feel the tension in the air ease as the forest recedes into the distance. The path climbs a low hill, revealing a stretch of open land bathed in moonlight, the grass shimmering like silver under the star-strewn sky. You pause at the crest, looking back at the shadows you've left behind, feeling the weight of Vlad's story settle into the tapestry of your journey. The donkey shifts beside you, his head low, his step steady as you continue onward. The air grows warmer, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the soft rustle of grass in the night breeze. You picture Vlad's figure receding into the past, his stories mingling with myth and rumor, his name whispered in fear or in grudging admiration. They say, you murmur, that history's cruelest figures are often the ones who leave the deepest marks, whether of terror or caution. The road bends gently, curving through a meadow bathed in moonlight. The donkey's ears flick, catching the distant murmur of a stream or perhaps the soft hum of insects. You walk in silence, your thoughts drifting like the breeze, the satchel at your side a quiet testament to the story collected along the way. The moon hangs high above, its pale glow a constant companion as the path stretches forward into the night, promising more tales of cruelty, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. The moon casts its silvery light over the winding path ahead, the landscape unfolding in hushed tones of midnight blue and silver. You and the donkey move quietly, the weight of the satchel at your side a reminder of the stories you carry, echoes of forgotten deeds, whispered names, and long-ago warning. As you walk, the next name rises from the shadows, a figure whose legend is both terrifying and strangely magnetic, Gilles de Rais. Hey guys, tonight we're still tracing the footsteps of history's darkest tales. You murmur, your voice low against the night's hush. The donkey's ears flick as though listening, his pace steady. The scent of distant wood smoke drifts on the breeze, mingling with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. They say, you continue softly, that you was a man of contrast, brilliant, charming, and utterly monstrous. Historians still argue whether his cruelty was a product of madness, ambition, or a twisted desire for power. You picture Gilles de Rais' imposing figure, once a respected nobleman, a companion of Joan of Arc, a man whose military prowess and charm won him titles and favor. But behind the polished facade lay darker urges, whispered rumors of disappearances and unexplained horrors. The donkey snorts softly, his breath forming clouds in the cool air, as though sensing the weight of the tale. The path winds through a grove of ancient oaks, their gnarled branches reaching skyward like grasping hands. You imagine the courtyards of Gilles' castle, the echo of footsteps on flagstones, the flicker of torchlight against cold stone walls. They say his wealth was as vast as his cruelty. You reflect. Some claimed he squandered fortunes on alchemy and failed magic, trying to reclaim something lost, or perhaps to gain something darker. The donkey's hooves strike a steady rhythm against the packed earth, a grounding counterpoint to the unsettling images forming in your mind. You recall how, after Joan of Arc's death, Gilles' life seemed to spiral into chaos, a descent marked by increasingly erratic behavior, lavish spending, and the vanishing of countless children from the villages near his estate. They say, you murmur, that his dungeons were filled with echoes of lost voices, that his crimes were so horrific they almost defy belief. Historians still debate the extent of Gilles' guilt, whether the confessions he gave were coerced or true. But the sheer weight of the accusation, the detailed accounts of rituals and brutal punishments, paint a picture that is difficult to dismiss. You imagine the fear that must have crept through the countryside, the whispered warnings passed from parent to child, the prayers offered against a terror that wore a nobleman's face. The path emerges from a grove into a clearing where the grass shivers under the moonlight. You pause, the donkey lowering his head to graze, his breath rising in soft puff. The silence here is profound, a contrast to the imagined echoes of Gilles' dark hole. They say, you continue, that his downfall came swiftly once his secret began to unravel, that his wealth couldn't protect him, that the very stones of his castle seemed to turn against him. You recall the trial, the testimony of survivors, the pale faces of courtiers and judges as the scope of his cruelty was laid bare. The scent of damp earth rises around you as you imagine the shock that rippled through the nobility, the realization that one of their own had harbored such darkness. Historians still argue whether Gilles' crimes were the result of personal demons, or if they were an extreme manifestation of a system that allowed power to corrupt absolutely. The donkey's ears twitch as a night bird calls from the shadows, its cries sharp and fleeting. You move forward, your steps slide against the path's gentle curve. The moon's glow softens the edges of the landscape, turning stone and leaf to silver. They say Gilles de Rais's story is a warning. You reflect softly, a reminder that cruelty can wear the face of charm, that darkness can grow in even the most glittering hole. The path climbs a low hill, revealing a panorama of fields and distant woodlands bathed in moonlight. You and the donkey pause, taking in the quiet beauty, the peace that belies the weight of the tale just told. The satchel at your side feels heavier, the stories it holds a reminder of the fragile balance between power and corruption, between ambition and morality. The donkey nudges your shoulder gently, his dark eyes steady and reassuring. You take a deep breath, the cool night air filling your lungs, and step forward once more. The road winds ahead, promising more stories, some as dark as night, others as soft as moonlight. The journey continues, each step carrying you deeper into the forgotten corners of history, where even the cruelest figures leave behind traces to be followed. The moon hangs high above you, a pale sentinel casting its gentle glow on the winding path ahead. The donkey's steady steps echo softly in the still night, the weight of your satchel a familiar presence against your side. With Gilles de Rais's tale now behind you, you breathe in the cool night air, laced with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The road unfolds before you like a scroll, promising more stories, more names etched into the annals of medieval cruelty. As you walk, a figure begins to emerge from the shadows of your mind. Vlad III, more commonly known as Vlad the Impaler. Hey guys, we're still wandering through history's darker corridors. You murmur, your voice low and steady against the night's hush. The donkey's ears twitch, as if listening for unseen threats. They say, you continue, that Vlad's name alone was enough to strike terror into the hearts of his enemies, and sometimes his own people. You picture the imposing walls of Vlad's stronghold, the dark silhouette of his castle against the blood-red sunset. His reputation, steeped in legend and fear, was built on tales of cruelty so graphic they teeter on the edge of myth. They say he was a master of psychological warfare. You reflect that he didn't just fight his enemies, he made an example of them. The donkey's hooves clop against the earth, a steady rhythm grounding you as you imagine the infamous forest of the impaled, a warning to invaders and traitors alike. The scent of wild garlic and the faint rustle of leaves whisper around you, conjuring images of desperate messengers reporting back to their leaders about Vlad's grotesque displays of power. Historians still argue whether the tales of his cruelty were exaggerated by his enemies, or if they were chillingly accurate. You muse softly. Your path dips into a shadowed hollow where the air feels heavier, almost as if the weight of the stories you carry presses closer. You imagine the chilling contrast between Vlad's calculated brutality and his occasional acts of generosity toward loyal subjects. They say he rewarded loyalty with kindness, you note, and that some peasants regarded him as a defender of justice, though his methods were, let's say, unconventional. The donkey pauses briefly to nibble at a patch of grass, his breath rising in soft cloud. You lean against a low stone wall, imagining the fortress towers where Vlad's enemies might have awaited their fate. The contrast between moonlight and shadow plays across the landscape, casting eerie shapes that dance along the path. They say, you continue, that Vlad's tactics weren't just about cruelty, they were strategic, designed to unsettle and disorient, to leave his enemies questioning every move. The legend of Vlad the Impaler blends fact and fiction so seamlessly that it's difficult to untangle the two. Historians still debate the true extent of his cruelty, the line between necessary ruthlessness and outright sadism. You picture the political landscape of 15th century Wallachia, a world of shifting alliances and betrayals, where survival demanded not just strength, but a willingness to terrify. The donkey's ears flick again as you resume your walk, the path rising gently toward a moonlit ridge. You imagine the travelers of centuries past whispering Vlad's name around campfires, their voices hushed as though afraid to summon his ghost. They say he was more than just a cruel man. You reflect that he was a symbol of the chaos and brutality of his time, a mirror reflecting the darkest fears of those who oppose him. The path levels out, revealing a broad field bathed in silver light. You and the donkey pause, taking in the quiet expanse. The weight of Vlad's story settles over you like a cold cloak, but the stars above twinkle with gentle indifference. They say he was a monster, you murmur, but also a ruler who understood that fear could be a weapon as sharp as any blade. The donkey nuzzles your shoulder lightly, his presence a warm counterpoint to the night's chill. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill your lungs, and step forward once more. The road stretches ahead, a ribbon of moonlit dust winding through a landscape filled with stories, some dark, some light, all waiting to be uncovered. Vlad's legend, with its blend of terror and tragedy, becomes another layer in the rich tapestry of history you carry. As you walk, the night deepens around you, the shadows thickening as the moon climbs higher. The donkey's steady breathing and the soft jingle of his harness are the only sounds accompanying your steps. The weight of your satchel is both burden and comfort, a reminder that every story, no matter how dark, is worth carrying forward into the light. The road ahead stretches long and steady beneath the silver light of the moon, the donkey's rhythmic steps echoing softly in the stillness. You shift the satchel on your shoulder, feeling the weight of the tales it carries, the legacies of cruelty, power, and ambition. As the landscape flattens into a broad, moonlit meadow, your thoughts turn to a figure whose story is darker still, shrouded in whispers and wrapped in mystery. Elizabeth Bathory, the so-called Blood Countess. Hey guys, ready for another twisted tale? You murmur, your voice low, almost conspiratorial. The donkey's ears flick at your words, as if sensing the gravity of the name you've just spoken. They say, you continue, that Elizabeth Bathory was one of the most feared and fascinating figures of her time, her legend soaked in blood, literally. The path winds through the meadow, the grasses rustling in a soft breeze that carries the faint scent of wild thyme and distant wood smoke. You imagine the grand halls of her castle, the high stone walls concealing unspeakable horrors. They say, you muse, that Elizabeth was obsessed with youth and beauty, and that her methods of preserving both were, let's just say, unconventional. The donkey's hooves thud gently against the earth as you picture her castle at Achtis, a fortress nestled amid the rolling hills of what is now Slovakia. The stories claim she lured young women into her service, only to subject them to cruel fates. Historians still argue whether the rumors of her bathing in blood were sensationalized by political enemies. You reflect softly, or if there was some grain of truth to the horror. You pause at the edge of a low rise, the moon casting long shadows over the landscape. The donkey stands patiently, his breath steady in the night air. You imagine Elizabeth's household, a place where cruelty was cloaked in luxury, tapestries hiding the stains of violence, laughter masking screams. They say her crimes were only discovered when she overstepped. You note that she began targeting noble girls, drawing attention she couldn't escape. The night air feels heavier now, thick with the weight of secrets. You picture the quiet desperation of those trapped within her walls, the fear that must have seeped into every corner. They say her trial was as much about power as justice, you murmur, with her accusers eager to claim her wealth and land. Historians still argue whether she was a monster, a scapegoat, or both. Your footsteps echo softly as you continue along the moonlit path, the donkey's quiet presence a steadying comfort. The stars above scatter like silver dust, indifferent to the shadows below. They say, you continue, that even as she was walled up in her own castle as punishment, her legend only grew, that the walls could contain her body, but not the stories whispered about her. The road dips gently into a hollow, the shadows deepening around you. You imagine travelers passing this way centuries ago, their conversations falling silent as they approach the lands once ruled by the Blood Countess. They say her name still haunts the villages nearby. You reflect, a reminder that cruelty, once loose into the world, leaves marks deeper than any stone. The donkey halts briefly to sniff at a cluster of wildflowers growing at the path's edge. You watch him quietly, your thoughts turning to the countless women whose lives were cut short, their names lost to time but their stories carried forward by whispers and warning. They say, you murmur, that every tale of cruelty contains echoes of those who suffered, and that remembering them is a way of honoring what was lost. The moon climbs higher, casting a pale glow over the meadow. You and the donkey move forward, your steps light but purposeful, your breath mingling with the night air. The The road ahead curves gently, disappearing into the shadows of a nearby wood. You feel the weight of Elizabeth Bathory's stories settle into the satchel alongside those of Vlad the Impaler, Gilles de Rais, and all the others whose names linger in the dark corners of history. As the path narrows between trees, the donkey's ears twitch at the sound of a distant owl. You glance up, noting the glimmer of moonlight through the leaves, the silvered edges of branches forming a delicate lattice against the sky. The air here is cooler, carrying the scent of moss and damp earth. They say the forest remembers, you whisper, and that even the trees hold on to the echoes of stories told beneath their branches. You and the donkey walk on, the night deepening around you, the weight of history settling like a cloak over your shoulders. The satchel at your side feels heavier, not just with the scrolls and stories it holds, but with the memories of those who once lived, loved, and suffered in these shadows. The journey continues, the road winding ahead into the unknown, each step carrying you deeper into the quiet, dark heart of history. The moon continues its silent vigil overhead as you and the donkey step lightly along the narrowing road, the trees arching overhead like silent witnesses. The air hums with the quiet sounds of the night, crickets, the soft sigh of wind through leaves, and the faint echo of your footsteps mingling with the donkey's measured pace. As the shadows deepen and the path climbs gently, your thoughts drift toward another figure whose story is steeped in darkness, Thomas the Torquemada. "Hey guys," you murmur, your voice low, blending with the night stillness. Ready for another grim tale? Let's talk about Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor who probably made bedtime stories a lot less relaxing. The donkey flicks his ears, as though bracing for what comes next. You imagine the bustling cities of Spain in the late 15th century, their sunlit plazas and narrow alleys darkened by the presence of the Inquisition. They say, you continue softly, that Torquemada's name became synonymous with fear, with whispers in the night and the rattle of keys unlocking dungeon doors. The path rises toward a rocky outcrop, the moonlight catching on the jagged edges of stone. You picture the Inquisitors in their austere robes, the flickering torchlight casting shadows across cold stone walls. Historians still argue whether Torquemada's cruelty was driven by fanaticism, personal ambition, or a grim combination of both. You reflect, your words carrying into the quiet. But one thing is certain, his name sent shivers down the spines of countless people. You pause to rest your hand on the donkey's neck, his warmth grounding you in the present. They say he was relentless, pursuing anyone suspected of heresy with a zeal that bordered on obsession. You continue. Confessions extracted under torture, lives shattered by accusation. Torquemada's Spain was not a place of the faint-hearted. The donkey's breath puffs softly in the cool night air as you step forward, your gaze drawn to the silhouettes of distant rooftops just visible against the horizon. They say, you murmur, that he was instrumental in orchestrating the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, a decision that reshaped the lives of countless families and left a wound in history that has never truly healed. Your steps echo on the worn stones of the path as you imagine the fear that must have gripped those summoned before the Inquisitors, the weight of secrets, confessions, and whispered prayers filling the air. They say, you continue, that even within his own lifetime, there were those who questioned Torquemada's methods, though few dared speak out. Historians still debate whether he believed he was saving souls or simply consolidating power. You pause at a small clearing where the moonlight filters down, dappling the ground in silver. The donkey stands patiently, his gaze steady and unblinking. They say he was buried in secrecy, his grave unmarked to avoid desecration, you say softly. But his legacy lingers, a reminder how cruelty can be cloaked in the guise of righteousness. The air here is cooler, scented with pine and the faint musk of damp earth. You listen to the quiet rustle of leaves and imagine the prayers murmured in secret, the forbidden texts hidden beneath floorboards, the quiet courage of those who defied the Grand Inquisitor's reach. They say, you reflect, that even in the face of such fear, there were those who resisted, who clung to their beliefs, their identities, and their quiet defiance. The road winds upward, the shadows lengthening as you climb. The donkey's steps are sure, his breath steady, as though he too feels the weight of these stories. You glance up at the stars scattered like silver dust across the sky, their light a silent counterpoint to the darkness below. They say, you murmur, that cruelty leaves its mark not just on the world, but on the soul. That even centuries later, the echoes of these stories linger, a caution whispered in the dark. The path narrows as it crests the hill, revealing a panorama of rolling fields bathed in moonlight. You and the donkey pause for a moment, taking in the quiet expanse, the soft rustle of grass, and the distant shimmer of a stream. They say, You whisper that the Grand Inquisitor's shadow stretched long over Spain, but that even in the darkest times there were glimmers of humanity, small acts of kindness, of courage, of resilience. The donkey's ears twitch as you shift your satchel, its weight a reminder of the stories carried forward. Each name, each tale a thread in the tapestry of history. The air is still, heavy with memory and the quiet hum of the night. You step forward once more, the donkey at your side, your footsteps echoing softly in the silence. Let's keep moving, you murmur, your voice a gentle thread in the dark. There's more to uncover, more stories waiting in the shadow. You and the donkey press onward, the moon casting silver light across the path as you leave behind the dark echoes of Torquemada's legacy. The night air sharpened, carrying the scent of damp grass and distant wood smoke, as if the world is readying itself to unveil yet another story. Ready for the next name, you whisper, your breath fogging lightly in the coolness. Tonight, we meet Vlad the Impaler. The donkey flicks his ears, as though unimpressed by the name's notoriety. You picture the rugged, forested hills of Wallachia, the craggy peaks and dark woods where Vlad ruled with a cruelty that would echo across centuries. They say, you murmur, that Vlad III, or Dracula as is better known, wasn't just a monster in legend but a man of ruthless ambition. The road winds through a shadowed copse of trees, their trunks stark and pale under the moonlight. You imagine the stone fortress of Pornari rising from the cliffs, the scent of pine and the distant clang of steel on stone. Historians still argue whether Vlad cruelty was born from necessity or sheer delight. You say, your voice low, almost conspiratorial. But those impalements, they weren't just punishment, they were spectacle designed to instill terror. You step over a gnarled root, your footfall muffled against the damp earth. They say Vlad lined the roads with impaled enemies, each body a grim message to invaders and traitors alike. You continue, your tone somewhere between incredulous and faintly amused. Talk about overkill. Or maybe he just had a dark sense of humor. The donkey snorts softly, perhaps expressing his own opinion on the matter. You glance up, imagining the crimson banners fluttering from castle walls, the glint of armor in torchlight. They say his enemies were not just the Turks or the boyars, but fear itself. You reflect, pausing to brush a stray leaf from your sleeve. His reputation was as much weapon as sword, a legend woven from blood and shadow. A soft rustle catches your attention, a fox darting across the path, its form a quicksilver flash in the night. You watch it vanish into the undergrowth, its presence a quiet reminder that even in dark tales, life continues. They say Vlad was a patriot, determined to hold his land against encroaching forces. You muse, your words blending with a rustle of leaves. But others claim he was a tyrant, whose name became synonymous with horror. The path slopes downward toward a clearing bath in moonlight, where the grass whispers under your steps. The donkey follows, his breath steady and warm against the cooling air. They say, you add with a soft laugh, that Bram Stoker borrowed Vlad's name and hint of his legend for Dracula. But the real man? Far grimmer than any vampire. You pause at the clearing's edge, the moon casting long, eerie shadows from the trees beyond. You can almost hear the murmur of villagers, the crackle of fires, the distant clang of the blacksmith hammer. They say, you murmur, that in some places, Vlad is still seen as a hero, his brutal methods credited with saving his kingdom. Historians still argue whether that absolves him, or whether the scars left on history are too deep to fade. The donkey nudges your arm gently, his gaze calm and steady. You pat his neck, feeling the strength beneath his hide, and step forward once more. The road rises ahead, its surface dappled with moonlight and shadow. They say, you continue, that Vlad's impalements were so gruesome, even the invading Ottomans hesitated to press on. But was it fear, or simply disbelief of the sheer audacity of it all? Historians still debate that, too. The air here is cool and crisp, laced with a faint scent of moss and the hum of unseen insects. You imagine the weight of armor on your shoulders, the heavy mantle of ruler in a world where mercy was weakness. They say, you reflect, that Vlad's reign was short but unforgettable, a chapter in history that reads like a nightmare made real. The path curved gently through a grove of tall, silent trees, their branches laced with moonlight. The donkey's hooves strike softly against the earth, the sound blending with your own quiet steps. You glance upward, tracing the silvered edges of the leaves. They say, you whisper, that even centuries later, his story is told not just in books but in the shudder of a tale whispered by the fire. That his name, twisted by time and legend, still holds the power to make listeners lean a little closer and lock their doors. The night deepens, the stars bright against the velvet sky. The donkey's breath steams faintly in the air as you move forward, the road unfolding before you like the turning of a page. Let's keep going, you say softly, your voice a thread in the darkness. There's still more to explore, more stories to share beneath the moon's quiet gaze. The donkey's ears flick at the rising chorus of crickets, their song weaving through the cool night air as the road meanders into a hollow framed by tall, silent trees. The moon overhead casts silver light through the branches, dappling the path with a lacework of shadows. Let's keep moving, you murmur, patting your companion's sturdy neck. There's another figure waiting in the wings of history's dark theater, Gilles de Rais. The donkey snorts quietly, as though unimpressed by the prospect. You can almost see the imposing figure of Gilles de Rais, his fine clothes stained with the weight of darker deeds, his blue banners fluttering over castles that concealed a multitude of sins. They say, you begin, that Gilles was a hero once, fighting alongside Joan of Arc, earning glory on the battlefield. You step over a fallen branch, your boots stirring the moss as you continue. But history remembers him for far darker reasons. They say he turned from war to pursuits much more sinister, luring children to his castles under the guise of kindness, only to... You pause, your voice catching briefly, then soften the thought. Well, let's just say their stories were swallowed by the stone. The donkey's breath comes steady and warm, a quiet presence beside you in the cool night. Historians still argue whether Gilles' crimes were as extensive as the records claim. You note softly, or whether some details were exaggerated by the courts to ensure his downfall. But one thing's certain, his story isn't one for light conversation over a meal. A breeze stirs the leaves above, and you glance upward, watching the branches sway against the moonlight. They say Gilles' wealth was vast, his taste extravagant. Tapestries, golden plates, musicians. But behind the opulence, there was a hunger that no feast could satisfy. You lower your voice, as if sharing a secret with the trees. They say he was obsessed with alchemy, with unlocking the secrets of immortality. Some whisper he believed that dark rituals could grant eternal life. You step forward, your footfall crunching softly on gravel. It's said that when his crimes were finally uncovered, even his loyal servants recoiled. His trial became a spectacle, a grim theater where the audience wasn't sure whether to weep or shudder. They say his confessions were chilling, not just the acts themselves, but the utter calm with which he described them. The donkey shakes his head lightly, a faint jingle from his harness bells mingling with the night sound. You pat his side, your fingers brushing his coarse fur. They say Gilles was executed in a public square, his body burned to ash. Some claim they saw strange shapes in the smoke, as though his sins were too heavy to disperse quietly. Historians still debate whether his remorse at the end was genuine, or just fear of the unknown. A fox darts across the path ahead, its form quicksilver in the moonlight. You watch it vanish into the underbrush, the rustle of leaves marking its passing. They say, you murmur, that Gilles' castles were abandoned for centuries, their stones left to crumble in silence. Locals whisper that strange lights could be seen flickering in the ruins, while that faint cries echoed through the holes at night. The road curves gently upward, the trees thinning to reveal a starlit meadow dotted with wildflowers. The air here is tinged with the scent of grass and dew. Some say, you continue, your voice low and reflective, that Gilles de Rais was simply a product of his time, a nobleman grown too used to taking what he wanted, his power unchecked until it turned inward. Others believe he was a true monster, his crimes beyond excuse or explanation. The donkey's pace slows slightly, his hooves muffled against the soft earth. You glance over, his dark eyes meeting yours with quiet, steady calm. They say his story was used as a cautionary tale for generations, you muse. A reminder that even those born to privilege and honor can fall into shadows darker than the night itself. The breeze stays again, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. You draw your cloak closer around your shoulders, the night chill settling over your skin like a quiet shroud. They say, you add with a faint, sardonic chuckle, that your spirit still lingers, tied to the lands he once ruled. Some claim to hear his voice in the windswept fields, whispering secrets too dark to name. The path ahead widens slightly, revealing the silhouette of an ancient stone bridge arching over a slow, dark stream. The water's surface mirrors the moonlight, a shimmering ribbon of silver cutting through the darkness. You guide the donkey carefully across, the soft clop of his hooves blending with the gentle murmur of the stream below. They say, you conclude as the bridge's far side comes into view, that every legend holds a grain of truth. Whether Gilles de Rais was a madman driven by greed and obsession, or a victim of his own ambitions and the world's cruelty, well, historians still argue over that. But his tale, like so many others, leaves a mark that won't easily fade. The meadow stretches beyond, bathed in moonlight and shadows, the road unfurling like a story yet to be told. The donkey's breath is steady and warm, a quiet presence at your side. Let's keep going, you whisper, your voice a thread in the night's hush. There are still more stories waiting in the wings, more secrets hidden beneath the silver glow of the moon.
The shadows lengthen as the sun dips lower, painting the road in hues of amber and violet. You feel the day's warmth still clinging to your skin, but a cool breeze rises, carrying with it the scent of cooling earth and the distant tang of wood smoke. Your donkey walks beside you, his pace unhurried but steady, his breath a quiet counterpoint to the hush of the approaching evening. You adjust the strap of your satchel, feeling the weight of the messages shifting against your hip, each sealed scroll a silent testament to the trust placed in your hands, and in the donkey's tireless steps. The path leads you into a small hollow where a cluster of low stone huts huddles together as though for warmth. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, and the faint murmur of voices drifts through the air, soft and musical. A woman stands at the edge of the clearing, her hands dusted with flour, her apron streaked with traces of dough. She smiles as you approach, gesturing toward a makeshift table laden with small, golden fritters glistening with honey. For the road, she offers, sweet to keep your spirits high. You thank her, tucking a few fritters into your satchel, the honey sticking lightly to your fingers. They say, she murmurs as you nibble one of the warm, fragrant pastries, that these fritters were once the favorite of a wandering bard, who claimed their sweetness helped him remember his verses on long journeys. Historians still argue whether the story's true, or just an excuse to enjoy a few extra bites. Her laughter is soft and easy, blending with the low hum of conversation and the distant bleat of a goat grazing nearby. You smile, savoring the fritter's crisp edges and the honey's floral richness as you guide your donkey onward. The road rises gently, flanked by ancient stone terraces where olive trees stretch their gnarled limbs skyward, their silver-green leaves catching the last light of day. The air is thick with the scent of crushed herbs and ripe fruit. You pause briefly to rest in the shade of a massive tree, its roots thick and tangled around a low stone wall. Nearby, an elderly man tends a small fire, stirring a pot of fragrant stew. He glances up and waves you over, offering a bowl and a chunk of crusty bread. For strength, he says, his voice a low rumble. They say even the simplest stew can taste like a feast when shared on the road. You accept his offer, the rich, savory aroma making your mouth water. The donkey stands nearby, nibbling on a handful of fresh herbs offered by the man's wife. They say, she adds with a sly smile, that donkeys know which herbs keep them strong, and which to avoid. She taps the side of her nose conspiratorially. Historians still argue whether the old tales of herb-savvy donkeys are truth or just travelers' fancy. Either way, it keeps them healthy, and it makes for good stories around the fire. You chuckle, the warmth of the meal and the quiet companionship easing the weight of the day from your shoulders. As you continue along the path, the sky deepens into twilight, the first stars pricking through the indigo veil above. The donkey's hooves strike a quiet rhythm against the packed earth, their sound blending with the rustle of wind through the trees and the distant call of an owl. The air grows cooler, and you draw your cloak tighter, feeling the crisp edge of night settling in. You come upon a small wayside shrine, its stone walls worn smooth by generations of travelers who have paused here to leave offerings, small bundles of herbs, fragments of bread, and thin slivers of honeycomb. A faint scent of beeswax and wildflowers lingers in the air. You pause, resting your hand lightly on the donkey's shoulder, and offer a few crumbs from your meal to the shrine's shallow basin. For the road, you murmur softly, and for safe travels. The donkey flicks his ears as if in agreement, his breath warm against your hand. The trail narrows once more, winding through a low pass where the rocky walls rise close on either side, their surfaces etched with ancient carvings, symbols and lines worn nearly smooth by time. The donkey moves carefully, his hooves ringing softly against the stone. The air here is hushed, the shadows deep and cool, and you feel a quiet reverence as you pass through the natural corridor. They say, you whisper, that these carvings were left by messengers long before the satraps, marking safe passage and secret messages in stone. Historians still debate their meaning, but the stories make the shadows seem less lonely. Emerging from the pass, you find yourself on a high ridge where the land falls away in a patchwork of fields and distant lights. The donkey pauses, his breath steady and strong, his silhouette outlined against the rising moon. You rest your hand on his neck, feeling the quiet pulse of life beneath your palm, and gaze out over the landscape bathed in silver light. The road winds onward, a ribbon of pale dust threading through the darkness, and you know you'll follow it wherever it leads. The air carries a faint scent of roasting chestnuts and the sweet, sharp tang of fermenting apples. You descend toward a cluster of homes where lanterns glow softly, and the sounds of evening laughter and conversation spill into the night. A woman standing at a doorway calls a greeting, offering you a slice of dark, spiced cake studded with dried fruit. "For luck," she says with a wink. "They say this cake brings safe travels and sweet dreams." You accept the offering, savoring its rich, fragrant flavor as you guide the donkey through the village's winding streets. As the last light of day fades and the moon climbs higher, you find a quiet spot near a low wall where you and your companion can rest. You lean back against the stone, your satchel resting in your lap, the donkey settling beside you with a contented sigh. The air is filled with the soft sounds of night, the distant murmur of voices, the gentle rustle of wind in the trees, the quiet shuffle of hooves on stone. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the stories of the road gather around you like a warm, familiar blanket, each one a quiet echo of journeys past and journeys yet to come.
The moon rises higher, its pale light turning the road into a ribbon of silver as you and your donkey press onward, the sound of your steps blending with a gentle rustle of the trees. Ready for another tale, you murmur, patting the donkey's side. This time, we'll meet someone whose cruelty echoed not through dark castles, but on the dusty streets of Florence, Bernardo Bandini. The donkey's ears flick forward, perhaps catching the name on the breeze. Bandini was a man of ambition, of boldness. You continue, your voice weaving into the night. They say he wasn't born to nobility, but he learned quickly how to navigate the twisting alleys of power. His name will be tied forever to one of the most infamous moments in Renaissance history, the Pazzi conspiracy. You pause to adjust your satchel, the weight shifting softly against your hip. Historians still debate whether Bandini was merely a pawn or a willing player in the plot, you muse. But there's no question about his role on that fateful day in 1478, when the doors of Florence's Grand Cathedral opened for Sunday Mass. It wasn't prayers that filled the air, it was blood. The donkey's hooves strike a steady beat against the road as you recount the scene. They say Bandini and his co-conspirators attacked the Medici brothers, Lorenzo and Giuliano. During the service itself, daggers flashed, chaos erupted, and while Lorenzo survived with wounds, Giuliano was not so lucky. Some say the cathedral's walls still echo with the cries of that day, the marble floors stained by history. A night bird calls softly overhead, its song blending with the rustle of leaves. Bandini fled after the attack. You continue, your voice low. He escaped Florence, slipping away into the shadows of European courts and distant ports. But fate has a long reach. He was captured in Constantinople. Imagine the surprise of the merchants and sailors when they realized who had been hiding among them. You guide the donkey around a bend in the road, the trees parting to reveal a small clearing lit by moonlight. They say, you murmur, that when Bandini was brought back to Florence, he faced not a trial but a spectacle. They hanged him from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio, his body swaying above the city as a warning to others. Historians still argue whether his punishment was justice or revenge. The donkey snorts softly, perhaps unimpressed by Bandini's dramatic downfall. You chuckle lightly, the sound almost lost in the night. They say Bandini's last moments were filled with curses and pleas, but others claim he faces fate with a strange, resigned dignity. Either way, his name became a cautionary tale in Florence, a reminder that ambition could lead not to fortune, but to the gallows. You pause beneath a towering oak, its branches reaching skyward like skeletal arms. It's funny, you remark, how quickly history forgets the smaller players in grand conspiracies. Bandini's name is often a footnote in the story of the Medici, his role overshadowed by the grandeur of the age. But for a moment, just one moment, he held the fate of Florence in his hand. A breeze stays the leaves above, and you listen to the gentle whisper of the wind. They say, you add softly, that the Pazzi conspiracy changed Florence forever. The Medici tightened their grip, The city's politics grew darker, and the shadow of betrayal hung over every banquet and council. Bandini's name may be half forgotten now, but his story lingers in the stones of the city. The donkey steps slow as you reach a small stream crossing the path. The water gurgles softly, its surface silvered by moonlight. You crouch to scoop a handful of cool water, the chill seeping into your skin. They say, you muse. That Bandini's story is a reminder that even in the glittering courts of the Renaissance, ambition could be as deadly as any dagger. You rise, brushing water from your hands, and continue along the moonlit road. Florence was a city of art, of music, of laughter and poetry. You reflect, but it was also a city of whispered plots, of secrets traded in candlelit rooms, of alliances sealed with blood. Bandini's tale is just one thread in that rich, dark tapestry. The donkey's breath is steady, his pace slow but sure as the road climbs gently toward a ridge. They say, you murmur, that in the end, Bandini's life was a warning, a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the price of stepping too close to the sun. Some call it justice, others tragedy. Historians still debate whether his fate was inevitable or avoidable, but the story remains. The night deepens, the sky is scattered with stars like fragments of lost dreams. You and the donkey walk on, the world around you hushed, as though listening for the next tale waiting in the shadows. The air is cooler now, a soft hush settling over the land as you and your donkey step into a quiet stretch of countryside. We're moving on, you murmur, patting the donkey's side. This time, to a woman whose name alone sends shivers, Isabella of France. The donkey's ears flick forward, perhaps catching the weight in your voice. They called her the she-wolf of France, you continue softly. Isabella, daughter of King Philip IV, was married to Edward II of England, a union meant to secure peace between nations. But peace was not what Isabella found. You guide the donkey past a crumbling stone wall, the shadows deepening under the trees. They say, you murmur, that Isabella was beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely ambitious. But Edward had his favorites, men like Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser. The king's affection for these men, and his neglect of Isabella, sowed seeds of resentment. A night bird calls from a branch overhead, its cry fading into the darkness. Historians still argue whether Isabella's cruelty was born of betrayal or cold ambition, you muse. But one thing is certain, her story is one of political maneuvering and chilling vengeance. You paint the scene with your words, the firelight of memory flickering in your mind. In 1326, Isabella allied herself with Roger Mortimer, a disgraced nobleman. Together, they raised an army and invaded England. Edward's forces crumbled, and the king was captured. His loyal favorite Hugh Despenser executed in a manner so grisly that even hardened soldiers looked away. The donkey's hooves strike a steady beat as you recount the tale. They say, you add, that Edward was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle, where he met his end in a manner historians still debate. Some claim it was simple suffocation or neglect. Others whisper of a red-hot poker, a tale so horrific it's hard to tell where fact ends and rumor begins. A breeze stays the leaves around you, the sound a faint echo of the past. Isabella, now the de facto ruler of England, governed alongside Mortimer. But power is a fickle friend. They grew arrogant, alienating nobles and common folk alike. Edward's son, young Edward III, staged a coup, capturing Mortimer and executing him. Isabella was imprisoned, her power shattered. You pause beneath a twisted oak, its branches gnarled and reaching. They say, you continue, that Isabella lived out her days in comfortable captivity, her title as queen consort never truly restored. Some portray her as a victim of circumstance, others as a manipulative force. Historians still argue whether her ambition or desperation drove her to such extreme. The donkey snorts softly, perhaps sensing the weight of the tale. You chuckle lightly. It said, you add, that Isabella's end was quiet, a far cry from the storm she unleashed upon England. She was buried at Greyfriars in London, her tomb lost over the centuries. Some say her spirit lingers, a reminder of the power and peril of a queen's scorn. Your steps echo softly on the path as you guide the donkey along the moonlit road. Isabella's story is one of contrasts, you muse. A woman torn between duty and desire, loyalty and betrayal. The she-wolf of France, a name that speaks of fierceness, but also of survival. The night sky stretches above, the stars shimmering like forgotten whispers. You and the donkey walk on, the quiet companionship a balm against the weight of history. They say, you murmur, that Isabella's legacy is still debated in quiet corners of libraries and candlelit studies. Was she villain or victim? Hero or traitor? Perhaps the truth, like so many threads in history, is a bit of both. You breathe in the cool night air, its crispness tinged with a faint scent of distant fires. But one thing is certain, you add softly. Isabella's story endures, in paintings, in poems, in the whispered tales passed down through generations. Her name, her deeds, forgotten by some, but never truly erased. The donkey's steady pace carries you forward, the road winding through the countryside like a memory made real. The moonlight paints the path in silver, your shadow stretching long behind you. Let's keep walking, you murmur, your voice blending with a night's quiet song. There are still stories waiting to be told. The air sharpens with the chill of approaching dawn as you and the donkey continue along the winding road, your steps softened by dew-kissed grass. The sky blushes faintly on the horizon, a promise of light that feels almost out of place as you prepare to step into the shadows of one of history's most infamous figures, Vlad the Impaler. You exhale softly. They say, you murmur, your voice barely louder than the morning breeze, that Vlad III of Wallachia was both a hero and a monster, depending on who's telling the story. To his enemies, he was Dracula, a name that would echo through centuries. To his own people, he was a defender of the realm. The donkey's ears flick as though he senses the weight of the tale. Born in 1431 in Transylvania, you continue, Vlad was the son of Vlad II Dracul, a member of the Order of the Dragon. That's where the nickname comes from. Dracula means son of the dragon. It sounds impressive, doesn't it? But it's also where things start to get thorny. Your breath fogs gently in the crisp air as you walk. Historians still argue whether Vlad's reputation for cruelty was earned or exaggerated, you say. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. He was a ruler in turbulent times, faced with threats from the Ottoman Empire, rebellious nobles, and the treacherous politics of his own court. Some say his harsh methods were necessary to maintain control. Others claim he relished the cruelty. The road bends, revealing a cluster of jagged rocks that rise like broken teeth from the landscape. You pause, gazing at them. They say Vlad's preferred method of punishment was impalement, hence the nickname. Victims were hoisted onto sharpened stakes, sometimes left alive for days. It was a message written in blood and fear. Betray me, and this is your fate. The donkey shifts, his breath warm against your sleeve. But there's more, you murmur. Vlad's use of terror wasn't random. He employed it strategically, using shock in order to deter invaders and traitors alike. Some say he once had a forest of impaled corpses surround his capital to frighten the Ottoman. Others whisper of a banquet where he dined among the dying as though seated at a feast. You continue walking, the dawn painting the path in pale gold. Historians still argue whether these stories were Ottoman propaganda or grim fact, you say. What's certain is that they worked. Vlad's enemies hesitated, his people feared and followed, and his legend grew. A faint bird call echoes overhead, the sound sharp against the stillness. They say, you add, that Vlad's end was as dramatic as his life. Betrayed by allies, he was killed in battle, some say by his own men, others by the Ottoman. His head was sent to Constantinople as proof of his death, a grim trophy for the Sultan. His body's resting place, historians still debate. Some claim he was buried at a monastery on an island. Others say the tomb is empty, the location lost to time. You glance at the donkey, who plods on with quiet determination. But his story didn't end there, you say softly. Centuries later, Bram Stoker would pen Dracula, borrowing Vlad's name and infamy to create the vampire we know today. The real Vlad wasn't a bloodsucker, at least not literally, but his legend is steeped in blood and shadow. The path winds gently uphill, the light growing stronger. And here's a little tidbit, you add, your voice tinged with amusement. They say Vlad once wrote a letter to a rival prince, threatening to impale him unless he showed loyalty. The twist? He signed it with a polite flourish, as though penning a dinner invitation. Historians still chuckle over that one. You breathe deeply, the scent of damp earth and distant pine filling your lungs. So, was Vlad a monster? A hero? A bit of both, you muse. It depends on who's telling the story. But one thing's for sure, he knew how to make an impression. You reach a bend where the landscape opens into a gentle valley, the rising sun casting long shadows across the field. The donkey pauses, his ears swiveling as if listening for unseen whispers. You rest a hand on his neck, feeling the warmth of his coat beneath your fingers. Let's move on, you murmur. There are still more tales to tell, more shadows to walk through before the light fully returns. The valley stretches before you, bathed in soft light and dappled shade, the road ahead winding into the promise of new story. The path curves gently as you and the donkey make your way out of the valley, where fields give way to thickets of elder and hazel, their leaves whispering with the rising breeze. The donkey's hooves tap a steady rhythm against the packed earth, and you feel the weight of the satchel at your side, as though the stories inside are eager to unfold. Tonight, you step into the shadow of another formidable figure, Gilles de Rais, a name that still sends a chill through historian circles. They say, you murmur, your voice low against a rustle of leaves, that Gilles de Rais was once a hero, a companion of Joan of Arc, no less. But his story is one of the most chilling transformations in history. The donkey's ears flick, catching the hint of unease in your tone. Born into wealth and privilege in 1405, you continue. Gilles was a celebrated knight, a loyal fighter in the 100 Years' War. His early years were filled with promise, marked by valor on the battlefield and favor at court. Historians still argue whether it was the death of Joan, the weight of his debts, or something darker that led him down a path of horror. Your breath forms faint clouds in the crisp air. They say Gilles retreated to his estate, where his behavior became increasingly erratic. It wasn't just eccentricity, it was something far more sinister. He surrounded himself with alchemists, charlatans, and mystics, desperate to restore his fortune to supposed dark arts. But it was what he did behind closed doors that haunts the pages of history. A gust of wind sends leaves skittering across the path. According to the charges brought against him, Gilles de Rais was responsible for the disappearance and deaths of dozens, possibly hundreds, of children, you say softly. Lured to his castles with promises of work or food, they vanished, leaving behind only whispers and grief-stricken family. The stories of what happened to them are too grim for a bedtime tale, but suffice it to say that his trial revealed a horror that stunned even his contemporary. You pause, listening to the wind, the donkey's soft snort, the quiet rustle of the underbrush. Historians still argue whether the trial was exaggerated, fueled by political motives and sensationalism, or if the evidence truly reflected Gilles' depravity. Some say the confessions were coerced. Others believe he was a man who succumbed utterly to his own darkness. The donkey shit beside you, and you place a calming hand on his neck. What we do know, you continue, is that Gilles was tried and convicted, his noble birth unable to shield him from the weight of his crime. He was executed in 1440, hanged and then burned, an end as dramatic and ghastly as his life. His story is a stark contrast to the hero he was in his youth. You walk in silence for a few moments, the road winding through a stand of trees where the shadows deepen. They say Gilles' tale is a cautionary one, you murmur, a reminder that even the brightest lights can flicker into darkness, that the line between hero and villain is thinner than we might think. The donkey plods on, his breath forming soft puffs in the cool air. But here's a curious tidbit, you add, a touch of amusement threading through your tone. In some regions of France, centuries later, children's cautionary rhymes still whispered his name. Beware the bluebird, they'd say, warning against strangers who seem too generous, too grand. Historians still debate whether the legend of Bluebird was directly inspired by Gilles de Rais or if the tales merged over time. Either way, his story lingers like a shadow. The path opens up onto a rise, where the last blush of sunset stains the sky a deep crimson. You pause to catch your breath, the donkey standing steady beside you. It's strange, isn't it? You muse. How a name can carry so much weight. How stories passed down through centuries can paint someone in darkness or light. Gilles de Rais, once a knight in shining armor, remembered now as one of history's darkest figures. The breeze carries the scent of wood smoke and the faint, sweet perfume of late-blooming flowers. You glance at the donkey, his eyes calm and steady, and give a quiet nod. Let's keep going, you say softly. There's still one more tale to weave, one more shadow to step into before we close this chapter. As you walk on, the road dips gently into a hollow where the first stars begin to prick the sky, their light fragile and ancient against the deepening blue. The donkey's steps are sure and steady, and you follow, the weight of the story settling over you like a cloak of old, whispered secrets. The night has thickened around you, wrapping the world in velvet and starlight as you and the donkey press onward along the narrowing path. The air carries a slight chill, touched with a distant scent of smoke from unseen hearths, and the satchel at your side feels lighter now, as though the weight of the stories within has finally eased. This last tale, you murmur to the donkey, his ears flicking toward your voice, is one of legend, woven with truth and shadow, much like the others. It's about Vlad III, the Prince of Wallachia, better known by the name Vlad the Impaler, or as some tales have it, Dracula. The donkey snorts softly, his breath forming clouds in the cool night. Born in 1431, you continue, Vlad was a prince who inherited a land caught between the Ottoman Empire and Hungary, a place where survival meant walking a razor-thin line. His methods were, let's say, unconventional. They say he ruled through terror, his punishments harsh, his warnings gruesome. The moonlight glimmers on the path ahead, casting long shadows that dance and flicker like candle flame. But it wasn't just cruelty for cruelty's sake. You explain. Vlad's methods were calculated, aimed at securing his rule in a time when betrayals were as common as rain and loyalty was a rare coin. Impalement, his signature punishment, was as much a message as a sentence. They say his forest of stakes were meant to deter not just common thieves, but armies. You pause to adjust the satchel strap, its contents shifting softly against your side. Historians still argue whether Vlad's reign was one of necessary brutality or if he crossed the line into sadism. Some claim his reputation was exaggerated by his enemies. Others suggest that even if the stories were half true, he was still a master of fear and control. A gentle breeze stirs the leaves at the path's edge, and you continue, your voice dropping to a softer cadence. Here's a curious tidbit. You add, Vlad was inducted into the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric group dedicated to defending Christianity from the Ottoman threat. The dragon emblem later twisted into the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. Historians still debate whether the connection between Vlad and the fictional vampire was direct or merely a case of dramatic embellishment, but it's a link that lingers. The donkey steps lightly over a patch of uneven ground, and you feel a subtle comfort in his steady presence. They say Vlad's reign left an indelible mark not just on his enemies, but on his people too. Some viewed him as a protector against foreign invaders, a necessary evil in a ruthless time. Others saw only the cruelty, the rivers of blood that marked his rule. And so his name became legend, his story both a warning and a fascination. You glance up at the sky, where the stars seem to whisper secrets of their own. But in the end, you murmur, Vlad's tale is a reminder that history is rarely simple. It's a tapestry woven of fear, survival, and the enduring human need for stories to make sense of the world. The path widens into a quiet meadow, the grass brushed with silver in the moonlight. The donkey slows, his breath steady, his presence grounding you in the stillness of the night. You pause, letting the silence settle around you like a cloak, the weight of history lingering in the air. Now, as the stories ebb into silence, let's ease into a gentle close. Let the pace slow, the images soften. Picture the moonlight stretching across rolling fields, the hush of night wrapping around you like a soft blanket. The donkey stands beside you, a steady companion through the tales of shadows and whispers. You breathe in the crisp air, tasting the faint traces of wood smoke and wild herbs on your tongue. The stories of Gilles de Rais, Vlad the Impaler, and all the others slip into the background, their edges blurring into the quiet. You feel the pull of sleep now, the gentle tug of dreams brushing against your thoughts. The path stretches ahead, a ribbon of silver under the moon. But for now, there's no need to follow. You can rest here, wrapped in the comfort of stories told and the quiet companionship of a steadfast donkey. Close your eyes, let the weight of the night settle over you, and allow your thoughts to drift with the soft rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of night insects, the faintest scent of lavender on the breeze. Sleep comes softly, like a whisper, like a promise, like the gentle fading of a candle's glow.